Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm going to give you a webinar on LODs in Tableau, which stands for Level of Detail Expressions. We're just going to wait a minute or two to wait for the late participants, so just bear with me. Okay, so first I'm just going to start with some housekeeping, just to let you know what is the situation. So first of all, the workbook that I'm using with all of the slides and them will be sent to you in the Meetup group. Sorry. So I'll just post a link to these materials on the Meetup, so look out for this after the webinar. The webinar is auto-recorded, and the recording of it will be uploaded to YouTube, link of which I will also post as a comment on the Meetup group in the event. At the moment, so all of the attendees are muted. That's just to keep the background noise as low as possible. I'm here joined by Robert, who's also part of the S13.
Hiya.
So he will be on the Q&A and chat windows. So if you have any questions, worries, if you think that I'm going too fast or too slow, let us know via chat. If this is something, it may be, Robert may be able to answer some of these questions. Otherwise, I will either maybe stop halfway through or maybe at the end of the webinar to answer some of your questions. As per the event description, you should all be familiar with the Tableau interface and the calculations, just idea of the calculations. So go maybe not too much into detail, but because again, the webinar is recorded, you should be able to go back to some of the earlier parts of the webinar if you feel like you want some recap as well. Okay, so this is me. My name's Hannah. I'm part of 13th cohort of the data school, and so is Robert. I'm Tableau Certified Associate and Alteryx Designer Advanced Certified. My background is in biomedical engineering, which I studied in Poland and in London. Feel free to contact me on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, or check me out on Tableau Public as well. I also do some Alteryx challenges, so you can see quite a lot of my posts on Alteryx community as well. Okay, so let's continue. So the plan for today is, first of all, to give the base knowledge of the LODs. So firstly, we'll go back to basics, look at the blue and green pills and how they affect the view, how they affect the calculations, normal calculations, and the level of detail calculations. And also then we'll go into LODs themselves, looking at 3 different flavors. And if we'll have enough time, we'll look at the LODs and filters as well. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, I hope you should know this by now, you have green and blue pills in Tableau. And you can see that on your left-hand side in the data pane, you have dimensions and measures. And dimensions are usually blue, measures are usually green, but it's not always the case. So if I just create an extra field that's called a month, we'll just look at the month of the order date. And if you see on the right-hand side, this will just give me a numerical value. So if I hit OK now, you can see that this landed in the measures and it's a green pill. And the green pill means that we're dealing with the continuous values. So now if I drag it onto, let me just zoom in first a bit. So if I drag on the canvas, you can see the ruler in the green area, which means that I'm going to get an axis. You can also see that because it's a measure, I'm getting an aggregated value. So here I'm getting sum of month, and I'm just getting a simple one for the value with the according axis next to it. So now if I change this into a discrete, you can see now that the pill here is, the pill is blue. And if I drag it onto the view, I'm getting separated rows. And in the result, I'm actually getting a single row, which is due to the fact that as a measure, month now is aggregated again. So what you can see from now is that if we have continuous values, which are green pills, then we're going to get an axis. If we have a blue pills, then we're going to get separate rows. And now if I drag this into dimensions, you can see that it's still blue. I'm still getting the rows, but because now month is considered dimension, instead of aggregation, you can see that at rows, the pill is not aggregated, so we just have month instead of sum of month. I'm getting all of the unique values, which is from 1 to 12, so all of the unique values in that field. And now if I drag it off and change it into continuous, you can see that now it's a green. And if I hover over the view, I'm getting a ruler. But now instead of getting a single bar, I'm getting 12 different marks for all of different values of month. Okay, so now how does it affect the calculations that we do? So how does the dimensions, measures, discrete and continuous values affect what we get in the view? So if we use, let's say, category and subcategory, and if I just add cells, you can see that I'm getting a sum of cells for each of the combination of furniture and, or category and subcategory. And I can make it even more granular if I, let's say, add segments on columns. I can even do it by not shift it by shift mode. So you can see that adding more dimensions in the view will split up the data even more. So you can think of the blue pills as separating the view, dividing the view, and the green pills will be will be axis, but the measures will be aggregated to fit those let's say, grids created by our dimensions. And so as short of a recap of what we just did. So first of all, both dimensions and measures can be discrete or continuous. So discrete will be marked as a blue pill and continuous will be marked as green pills. Dimensions will split up the view by unique values that they have, and measures will be aggregated to the level specified by dimensions. So now the LODs, what LODs allows us is to actually change that level of detail that we're looking at. So this is just the syntax of what the LODs look like. So the most important part are those curly brackets around them. This is the syntax, the part that specifies that this is actually a level of detail expression. Then we have a keyword, which can be fixed, include, or exclude. Then we have a list of dimensions that we want to include in our level of detail, which can vary from 0 to multiple dimensions. If you use more than one, make sure that you separate them with a comma. Then in purple, you just need to, after specifying the list of dimensions, you need to add a comma, a colon, and then give the aggregate expression that you want to use. You can't use table calculations or attribute function in a level of detail calculations. Okay, so this doesn't look very friendly, the syntax itself, but we can also try find a way to translate it into English. So this I'll have to credit Andy for coming up with this. So you can think of, if you use fixed LOD, which is I think the easiest to grasp the concept of it. So for fixed LOD, you can think of this as for every dimensions that you specify, in this case for every category, then compute the aggregate expression that you have. So for every category, compute sum of sales. Now at fixed, you can also skip the dimension, which will just look at, it's as if you were saying compute total sum of sales. So if there's nothing here, you're computing the total. And just another taste for those who are a bit more familiar with the LODs is that you can skip the keyword fixed and the colon altogether and just wrap the sum of sales in the curly brackets, and that will do the same thing. Okay, so if we have subcategory, category, and sales in the view, we're going to get sum of sales most likely for each of the subcategory and category, which we can alter with our fixed LOD. So in this case, this is the same thing we had when we were translating the syntax into English. So we have for each category, compute sum of sales. And you don't really, you're not really interested what is in the view at all. And as well, you can just compute the total sum of sales. So if you compute total sum of sales in here, it's as if you're taking only the field with sales and just calculating the ground total, the ground sum. Okay, so as an example, if we have category rows, so if I add now sales, I'm going to get 3 different values for 3 different categories. If I split the view more by subcategory, I'm going to get even more values. And what we can do here is, let's say you want to get the total by category, total sum of sales by category. So one thing is you can add subtotals, which is great. You get the value and at the bottom of each category. But the problem is you can't really use it in the calculations. So now if I do category sales fixed, so if you do double forward slashes in the calculate field, it'll work as a comment, which will not be taken into account as a calculate field. So what we want to do is for each category, compute sum of sales. I'm just going to do the way we did earlier in the slides. So fixed on category and then sum of sales. Now, if I add this as well in our view, you can see I'm getting the same values for furniture for all of the rows that are furniture as I get for my subtotal. And then even more, we can add our grand totals. So just to compare, to see what are the actual values. We can also do total sales fixed. And what we want to do is compute total sales, which we can just write as fixed on nothing, and then just sum of sales. You can also skip this part altogether and just have sum of sales in curly brackets. I'm just going to keep it this way so that you know that I'm actually using fixed as my keyword. And now if I add it into the view, you can see that I'm getting the same value. So for all of my rows, I'm getting the same value as I'm getting for my grand total at the bottom. And now we can also add it as a, so now let's see how it works in practice. So one of the things we can do with this is a cohort analysis, where we look at how much of sales do each of the group of the customers contribute for each of the years. And we want to define the groups based on the first year, based on the year of their first purchase. So let's start by building just the bar chart itself. So first we have order date on columns, and this will automatically aggregate to the year level. Then we want to have sum of sales on rows, which will just result in a simple bar chart. And now we have to figure out our way to do the cohort analysis. So I'm just going to call this first purchase. So what we want to find here is for each customer, find the first purchase. And first purchase will be nothing else than a minimum of order date. So this will be the very first order they made. So this one, we want to fix on customer ID, just to make sure that our customer are definitely unique in case we have some duplicated names. And then we just want to find the minimum of order date. This is really what we need, because order date will be automatic. Well, this calculation will be a date itself, but when we drag it into the view, it will automatically be aggregated into a year level. That's fine. So now you can see I landed into dimensions as a blue pill with a little calendar mark next to it, which tells us it's a date. So now if I drag this onto a color, I should get our cohorts, just to make sure it looks the same as in the previous view. I'm just going to rename the title of it into the cohort. So we're looking very similar to what we have in the goal. The last part is to add those labels that give us the percentage of the yearly sales that each of the cohort contributes. So if I hit Control key on sum of sales, drag it onto labels, I'm just going to get the sales values. I want to change it into a percent of total as a quick table calculation. And I just have to make sure, so I have to make edit and compute using table down. And there it is. So I'm getting the results. You can additionally format it so that you don't have any decimal places. There you go. So that's one of the examples. The other one is where you have, let's say you're looking at the country level contribution to global sales. So how much of the global sales make up the country sales? And so you can, it seems fairly easy, but the trick here is to keep the values as they are if we filter down. So let's say if I filter down to China, okay, I'm still getting 6% instead of I'm just going to show you what's going to happen if you're going to use table calculation. Okay. So if you double click on country, you get the map. It may be actually start as a circle mark, so just change it to a map, that's fine. And so if you use just sum of cells on colors and do the same on labels. So if on labels you change this into a quick table calculation as percentage of total and just format this so it doesn't have decimal places. Mark. Interesting.
You want to split in pain?
There we go. Okay, so you can see that I'm getting the same values as I did in as I do in here. But now if I add country filter and just change this into single bond list, you can see that, so even though I'm getting 6% of China in this view, if I drill down, this will be 100%. That's because table calculation will look only what you have in the view. So currently we have only China in the view, not anything else. But that's okay, we can fix this with level of details calculation. I'm going to write this all in one calculation, but you can also write it as 3 different calculations. So first you want to find for each country, calculate sum of cells, fixed country sum of cells. And then we want to, so this will give us our country cells. And then if we just divide it by global cells, here, so calculate total cells. But we can just write as fixed on nothing and sum of cells. This is what I was talking about earlier on. Okay, so you can write these as separate LODs. So you can write first the country sales LOD, then the global sales LOD, and finally just a normal calculation that divides one by the other. Okay, so now if I get rid of the sum of cells from the view and add the country contribution on the colors and country contribution on the labels. So now you can see that it's in the, again, in not the format that we would want to. So I'm just going to change this to percentage with 0 decimal points. And now you can see I'm getting the same values as before. But now if I filter into China, I'm still getting 6%, even though the color palette is different. So to keep the color palette the same, go to the, into have all of the values in the view, go to the colors, edit colors, advanced, and then just make sure that you tick start and end checkboxes in the middle. And now if I zoom into China, I'm getting the same teal color, which is easier for users to understand that's the same value. Okay, so this is pretty much part about the fixed LODs. And maybe, well, one of the things about fixed LODs is that it's quite rigid, so it's literally fixed on the dimensions that you specify. But there are some other alternatives that you could use that will take into account what you have in the view. Sorry. So one of the options is include LOD, which you can translate as for every dimension in the view and the one that you specify, compute the aggregation. So in this case, this will be for every dimension in the view and product, compute sum of cells. So if you go back to our previous example where we had subcategory, category, and cells in the view, this include LOD will calculate for each product, subcategory, and category will compute sum of sales. So this will use more granular data than what you have in the view. Another thing is to exclude some of the fields. So for example, so for exclude LOD, you want to translate it into that for every dimension in the view, except the specified one, you want to compute sum of sales. And so if you translate this one, this will be for every dimension in the view except subcategory, compute sum of sales. So if you want to have a look at what subcategory, category, and sales in the view, this will pretty much just look at the category and sales. So for each category, compute sum of sales. So you can think of this that you have your dimensions in the view specify the level of detail of your viz, of your view. You can use exclude to go to less granular or more aggregated data, but that means you'll have the same value for multiple rows or columns in your view, which means you'll have to duplicate those values to get back down to the view level of detail. Again, you can use include LOD, where you'll go to more granular or less aggregated data, but that will mean that you have more values that available spaces in the view, so you'll have to aggregate those values up to get back what you have actually in the view. So as an example, okay, so we're going to have a look at subcategory and average product sales. So now if I do product ID, you can see there are many products. And now if I just drag sum of sales on columns, I'm going to get a lot of bar charts. Actually, you can see at the bottom here is that I'm having 10,000 marks. And now how I can get these average sales is adding a constant line into your pane. I'm just going to edit quickly to get the actual values. So now you can see that I'm getting 1128. For accessories, but this is not really a very nice view because you can't really that easily compare these values. These average values, they're not that easily seen, and the many bar charts just add a lot of clutter to what we have. So alternative would be to use include LOD. So in this case, we're going to find average product sales. And so we want to do for each dimension in the view and product ID just to make sure that it's definitely unique. Compute sum of sales. Sum of sales, and then take average. Okay, so if we just include product ID and compute sum of sales, this will do this first part of what we want to achieve. So this will do the bar chart part of the previous view. We also want to wrap it up in an average function so that we make sure that we aggregate it in the right way. So the default aggregation will be sum. So if I would just leave only this part in the calculation and drag it onto columns, I would get some of this, which is not what we want. You can wrap it in an aggregation function straight away so that you make sure that the right aggregation is used. And OK, and drag it onto columns. Now you can see that I'm getting AGG of my pill, what just means that the expression inside the calculation is already aggregated. Okay, and you can see I'm getting 128 for my accessories, just as I had in my previous view. And this, so include here, would also accommodate for the different things you have in your view. So if I add segment onto columns, I'm getting 639 for accessories and consumer. And now I can do the same thing with my LOD, where I'm also getting 639 for accessories and consumer. Okay. And now just another way of looking at it is to look at the maximum daily profit within each month for each of the categories. So first what we need to have is, that would be month of order date. And also categories on rows. And now what we need to find is the maximum daily profit. Maximum profit. And what we want to do is for each dimension in the view, and each order date at day level. Just go to the next one. Compute sum of profit, and then take maximum. So here we want to include okay. I got a note that background sound is very noisy. Is that for everyone? Is it just one person? Can you let me know in the chat? Okay. I'll try speak clearer and louder if that is okay. But I'm getting mixed responses. Okay, I'm getting mixed responses, so I'm just going to continue. I'll try to speak a bit louder so that my voice is easier to hear, if that's okay with you. Okay, so back to the task at hand. So in this case, we want to include order date. So another note in here is that if you look at the order date, you can see that it has a calendar next to it, which means it's a date field, which means that the lowest level of detail for this will be a day. If it had a clock as well, this would mean that it's a date time field. In this case, you have to specify that you want to take only day of order date. So in this case, we can leave it as it is. So for each order date, we want to get sum of profit. So this, so I have so far is just this part, and now we have to wrap it in the maximum function. So if I just add maximum at the end, this will compute for each dimension in the view and each order date at day level, we're going to compute sum of profit and then get the maximum of this. And now if I just drag it on the rows, I'm going to get the line as I had in my the finish line, let's say. And you can see that the maximum and minimum values are the same as I'm getting in my reference dashboard as well. So for office supplies, we're getting the total of 49.86, which is the same in my worksheet here. And now we can, so in here again, you could try to look at different segments. So if you just add into columns, you're going to get different values as well. So it just shows you that this way of looking at LODs is much more flexible. So now with Exclude, let's say you have a category and subcategory in the view, and you want to have your sum of cells. So here it is. So if you want to have your sum of cells for each of the category in the view with subcategory as well, you could use the ones that you could use the category cells fixed. So that's the calculation that is fixed on the category. It's doing pretty much the same thing here. The problem is that if I add, let's say, a segment into my view, I'm still getting the same values. So you can change the order here. So for each of the segments, I'm getting the exact same values for all of the subcategories within the same category. So to accommodate for this, I'm just going to create another LOD. So this will be category cells exclude, in which we want to have for each dimension in the view, except subcategory, compute officer. Okay, and to do that, we just need to exclude subcategory and then just get sum of cells from here. And now if I add this, just add this in the middle, I'm going to change this here. So you can see that if I don't have anything else in the view, so it's only calculate for category, I'm getting the same values for exclude and fixed. But then if I add segment again, you can see that I am getting different values now than what I would for fixed. And if I compare with the subtotals, you can see that my values that I'm getting in the exclude calculation are the same as my subtotals that are calculated by Tableau itself. But these are the values that you could also use in the calculations. And you can also change it into, instead of segment, you can look at the ship nodes. And again, you'll have different values. The whole correct. Okay, so to use those calculations, we can look at how much the subcategory cells and how much average subcategory cells differ from average category cells. So to do so, we need to have, let's just have category and subcategory fields. You don't really, okay. And then we want to have our average category field, category cells, sorry. And for each dimension in the view, except subcategory, compute average cells. we're just going to do with exclude category and then average sales. Okay, so now if I'm just going to add sales and my average category sales. Okay, so you can see that because I added sales without any other aggregation, I'm using here sum of sales. I want to change this to have average sales. So measure and then change it to average. And now let's create a calculate field that combines the two. So that will, let's just call it average subcat sales difference from average category sales. And what you can do here is you can just drag those fields that you already had in the view. So if I just drag average sales, this is what I'm having in my calculate field, and I just want to see the difference using just subtraction. Okay, so this will just calculate the difference between average sales in the view and average category. And now if I add this as well at the end, you can see that average category sales and that difference sum up to our average sales. And again, I can divide it, split the view even more by adding segment, which again, my average category sales and subcategory sales would sum up to my average sales, the difference. So you can see that for furnishings, my average sales for the subcategory were $251 lower than my average category sales. And you can also change that with the shift mode as well. Okay, so as a summary on this, depending on what that you're trying to do, you can use fixed that will fix on the dimensions that you specify. So if you specify dimensions, it will just look at those dimensions and the measures that you include in your calculation. If you don't specify any dimension, no dimension will be included. So you'll just look at the measures that you specify. You can also take into account what you have in the view. So you can use include to use more granular data than what you have in the view, or exclude to use less granular data. Now there's another thing that is called order of operations, which is pretty much the order that Tableau performs certain actions. So first you have those, so you have extract filters, data source filters, and context filters. So these are the filters that happen before the user can even see anything.
Someone else, what's a context filter?
Yes, I'm talking about this right now. Okay, so the first two filters, so the extract and data source filters, will be, you can change them in the data source pane. I'll get to the context filter in a minute. So if you just add those in here, if you have extract, then you'll be adding extract filter. If you have like connection, you can also add this filters if you right click on your data source. The context filters are, you can add them in your view. So if we go back to our map example, if you right click on your filter and then you can have the option to add it to context. This just means that this filter will be performed before any of the things that are below it. So after the context filters, you have your fixed LODs. So if you want your fixed LOD to be affected by the filter, you will need to add that filter into the context. Then you have some set filters and dimension filters, and then you have your include and exclude level of detail expression. Okay, so just to just compare it and give you an idea of what's going on. So let's add our category and subcategory in the view. Change it to height. And now if I just add, let's just get normal cells, and then category cells exclude and category cells fixed. You can see that I'm getting my, I have my subtotals as well. So now if I add a subcategory filter, and let's say I want to have a look at furniture category, but without bookcases. I'm just going to take the bookcases out. So you can see now is that my category cells for fixed are not changed. That's because fixed LOD will be calculated before the subcategory filter is applied. However, that filter will affect my exclude calculation. So for my category excludes, I'm getting the same values as I'm getting in my grant total, because that will be also just the grant total is a form of a table calculation, so that will be calculated later on. Okay, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if I now add subcategory to the context, the subcategory filter to the context, you can see that my category cells using fixed LOD has also changed, because if I go back to my order or operations, the context filters will be performed before the fixed LOD. Yeah, is everyone okay with this? And do a short recap now. Okay, so I haven't really said about this, but just a thing to keep in your mind. If you have all of the dimensions that you need in your view already, it might be a good idea to try table calculations first. If you don't have all of these dimensions, an LOD might be a good idea first. So the problem with LODs is that, well, pretty much with one thing in Tableau, is that there are so many ways of doing things. Everything depends on what you're actually trying to achieve, and there is no, let's say, strict rules. It's more of a guidelines. So then you may want to think whether you want your calculation to be flexible or a bit more rigid. So if you want your calculation to depend on what you have in the view, then try using include or exclude. If you want it to be calculated always the same way, then you should use fixed. And then if you think about your the filters that you want to use, so if you want those filters to affect your LOD, then include or exclude, or you can use fixed with adding the filter to the context. If you don't want filters to affect your LOD, then use fixed, but make sure you do not add that filter into the context. Okay, so pretty much another thing is that you could potentially write everything using fixed, but then you're losing this flexibility that include and exclude gives you. So that is just something to think about. Here are some extra resources. The first three points are from Tableau itself. The fourth one is from Andy Kribo, who he's just giving more examples on how to translate the fixed LOD into plain English and so on. Feel free to contact me with any questions about Tableau, LODs, or Alteryx. So that's one thing. Another thing is make sure to check out the Me tab, Let's Talk Data. As a reminder, I will post these. So here's the link. I will post the link to the materials I use, so the link to the workbook and a link to the recording of the webinar itself. I'll comment it in the meetup event, so make sure you check that pretty soon. Another extra resource is our data school blog, where many of our data scholars are sharing their knowledge, whether that's about Tableau or Alteryx, or maybe the data school itself if you're interested in applying. I think I will be actually writing a blog on LODs to explain it once more and make sure that's understandable. Okay, so that is it from me. We have a few minutes left, so I'll answer any questions if there are any.
With none outstanding at the moment. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's a thank you. Not a question, but thank you for that feedback.
Okay, so if you have any feedback, that will be also very helpful for me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that for those of you who haven't had much experience with LODs, you now get more to grips with how they actually work. And for those who are a bit more familiar with them, I hope that I showed you a few tricks that you can use that will be helpful for you as well. I'm just going to stick around for a few more minutes if you want to ask more questions. Okay, so we got a question about the context filter. I don't think it is. It's just to make sure. So if I go to the order of operations, so if you use, let's say you use dimension filters, but you have some set filters in the view, and if you want to make sure that your dimension filter is performed before the set filter, if you add it to the context, it will be performed before set filters. Adding a filter to the context, it means that you'll jump from wherever you are in the, let's say in the queue, back to the line of context filters, if that makes sense. We have also one question about displaying the linked material and recording. That was, the problem is that we don't have the recording link yet because we'll have to upload it onto YouTube. So I will upload it on the meetup, just add a comment on the meetup event that you probably accessed the webinar through. Let's have a look at this. Okay, so this is the event on Meetup, and I will just add a comment at the end of it with all of the details to the links to the materials and the recordings. Actually, I'm just going to copy this. Yeah. Where is the chat? It's in Q&A. So I sent
one person.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to just put it in the general chat?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now you should get the links just to the webinar event page on Meetup, where I'll just comment with the materials and the recording link so that you can go back to what I've talked about. When it's uploaded, yes. It might take a few days, so bear with me, but the materials I'll be sending very soon.
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Okay, I'm just going to stick for the next 5 minutes. If you have any more questions, so feel free to ask away. Otherwise, feel free to contact me any way you want. And also thank you all for coming and listening.